The rain fell like judgment the night Kang Min-ho stepped out of his black Mercedes and saw her, curled beneath a torn cardboard sheet outside his five-star hotel, clutching a sleeping child to her chest like a shield against the world. Something cracked open inside him. Not pity, not charity. Something older, something violent and tender all at once, like a door he'd forgotten existed had suddenly blown off its hinges. His bodyguards moved to clear her away. He raised one hand. They froze. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't explain her. But the moment her eyes opened and locked onto his, dark, exhausted, refusing to break, Kang Min-ho, the most feared prosecutor in all of Seoul, felt something inside him kneel. Welcome to AfroKorean romance, where love has no borders. If you believe in love, please like, share, and subscribe for more AfroKorean romance stories. Seoul was not a city that tolerated weakness. Kang Min-ho had built his entire life understanding that truth. At 36, he was the youngest chief prosecutor in the nation's history, a man whose name made corrupt politicians sweat through their suits and whose silence in a courtroom was more terrifying than another man's shout. He wore tailored charcoal suits like armor. He spoke in measured sentences that cut like scalpels. He had no wife, no scandal, and no mercy for those who deserved none. He was not supposed to stop on a rain-slicked pavement outside the Hanwha Grand Hotel at 11:30 on a Thursday night. And yet, "Sir," his head of security, Park Di-sung, appeared at his elbow. "Should we?" "No." The word came before Min-ho's mind had finished forming a thought. The woman on the ground stirred. She'd heard them. Of course she had survival sharpened the senses, and whoever she was, she had clearly been surviving for a long time. She sat up slowly, one arm wrapped tight around a small girl of perhaps 4 years old who slept on without waking, her tiny face pressed against the woman's neck. The woman herself was extraordinary in the way that things forged under pressure become extraordinary, beautiful with the kind of beauty that hardship cannot erase, only deepen. Her dark skin gleamed with rainwater. Her natural hair, wrapped in a damp cloth, sat like a crown she didn't know she was wearing. Her eyes, when they finally rose to meet his, were brown and enormous and absolutely, furiously unafraid. She expected to be moved along. He could see it in the way her jaw set. Min-ho crouched down instead. His $2,000 suit met the wet pavement without hesitation. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. In English, instinctively, something in her face told him Korean would not be her first language. Her chin lifted. "That's not your business." American accent, educated. The contrast between her words and her surroundings struck him like a physical thing. "You're right," he said quietly, "but the child is my business, it's 4 degrees. Something flickered across her face. Not gratitude, not yet. More like the exhausted calculation of someone weighing danger against desperation. She glanced at the little girl, then back at him. "I'm not a charity case," she said. "I didn't say you were." The standoff lasted 3 seconds. Then Min-ho stood, turned to Di-sung, and said in Korean, "Book them the suite next to mine. Tonight only, send food." He paused. "And something warm for the child." Di-sung's expression betrayed nothing. He had worked for Min-ho for 9 years and had learned, long ago, not to question the small moments when the iron in his employer's face quietly dissolved. Her name was Amara Osai. She told him that much over the bowl of jjiggy, the hotel kitchen sent up at midnight. The little girl, whose name was Lily, asleep in the suite's enormous bed, buried under a duvet that probably cost more than Amara's last month of meals combined. She told him she was 28, that she had come to Seoul 14 months ago following a research position that had fallen through when the funding dried up, that she had a master's degree in biochemistry from Johns Hopkins, that her Korean employer had held her passport for 3 months before she'd managed to retrieve it through sheer stubbornness and a well-placed call to the American embassy. She did not tell him about Lily's father, and he did not ask. What he noticed instead, the way she held her spoon, precise, controlled, like someone determined to maintain dignity in every small thing. The way she watched the door periodically, instinctively tracking exits. The faint tremor in her hands that she worked very hard to conceal. She was not fragile. She was something more complicated than fragile. She was a person who had been broken and had rebuilt herself so many times that the structure was now stronger than the original, and the cracks were the most interesting part. Min-ho sat across the small table and said very little, which was unusual for him. In courtrooms, he was precise and relentless. Here, he simply watched, and felt something he had no proper name for settle into his chest like an anchor dropping. "You're starring," Amara said without looking up. "I apologize." "You don't look sorry." "No," he agreed, "I'm not." She did look up then, found him watching her with an expression she couldn't categorize, not desire, not pity, not the particular predatory interest she had learned to identify and sidestep. Something more careful than all of those. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "Most people walk past." Min-ho considered the question the way he considered all important questions, seriously, and without pretending the answer was simple. "I don't know," he said finally, which was true, and Kang Min-ho almost never said things he could not explain. By morning, he had made a decision that would change both their lives. Min-ho understood, with the cold clarity that made him exceptional at his job, that he could not simply send her back to the street. He also understood that charity alone would insult her. He'd read that in her spine within the first 30 seconds. What she needed was structure, legitimacy, a roof and a reason to occupy it that didn't cost her her pride. And he, through a situation he had created through sheer stubbornness, needed something specific. 3 weeks earlier, Kang Min-ho had made a very public, very foolish bet. It had begun at a charity gala, where Deputy Commissioner Shin Hyun-woo, a man Min-ho had been building a corruption case against for 2 years, had looked at him across a table of Seoul's elite and said, loudly enough for 8 people to hear, "A man like Kang has no room in his life for a real woman. He would never choose love over ambition. He doesn't know how." Min-ho had looked at Shin Hyun-woo for exactly 4 seconds and said, "I'll be married within the month." The table had gone silent. Min-ho had regretted it immediately and forgotten it almost as quickly, until his mother had heard and called him 11 times in 2 days, and his rival within the prosecution office had started sending congratulatory messages dripping with mockery. He needed a wife, not a real one, a temporary arrangement. Someone who would appear on his arm at 2 upcoming public functions, satisfy the gossip columns, neutralize Shin's commentary, and then quietly dissolve into a generous settlement. He told Amara all of this over breakfast. She stared at him for a very long moment. "You want to marry me," she said slowly, "to win a bet. To neutralize a political liability. The language of betting is reductive. The concept of using a homeless woman as a prop is reductive. I'm offering you a home, legal status, a living allowance, and laboratory access at Seoul National University through my connections. Lily would be enrolled in school." He paused. "For 90 days. Amara stared at Lily, who was systematically destroying a hotel croissant with the focused energy of a 4-year-old who had not eaten well in some time. "I don't know you," Amara said quietly. "No," Min-ho agreed. "But I know what I'm offering, and I know you're intelligent enough to weigh it accurately." Another long silence. "If you ever speak to me the way powerful men speak to women they think they own," Amara said softly, "I will walk out and take your story to every journalist in this city." "Understood. And Lily stays with me. She's not hidden away somewhere. She is welcome in my home." Amara looked at him again with those dark, assessing eyes. "Why me specifically?" Min-ho held her gaze. "Because you looked at me in the rain and you didn't flinch." His home was not what she expected. She'd braced for the kind of sterile, magazine-perfect penthouse that men like him seem to inhabit in Korean dramas, all glass walls and no soul. Instead, the residence at the edge of Bukhansan district was large and quietly beautiful. Traditional architecture updated with clean modern lines, a garden that suggested someone actually cared for it, and a kitchen that smelled permanently of the sesame oil his housekeeper Mrs. Young used for everything. Lily walked in and immediately declared it a castle. Amara walked in, and immediately identified every exit. Min-ho watched both reactions with an expression that was very nearly amused. He gave her the east wing, 3 rooms, her own bathroom, a small study. He arranged the laboratory access within 48 hours. She'd tested him, half expecting him to delay, and he had not. He had called the head of the biochemistry department at SNU at 7 in the morning and spoken for approximately 90 seconds, and the access had been granted by afternoon. She told herself she was not impressed. She was deeply impressed. The first public appearance was a government reception at the grand ballroom of the Joseon Palace Hotel. Min-ho appeared at her door at 6:15. She opened it in a deep burgundy gown that Mrs. Young had quietly arranged, floor length, draped beautifully over her curves, her natural hair lifted into an elaborate updo with a few curls escaping at her temples. She'd borrowed Mrs. Young's pearl earrings. Min-ho went completely still. Not for a moment, for several seconds. "Is something wrong with the dress?" Amara asked. "No," his voice was controlled, his eyes were not. "Nothing is wrong." She studied him. He was in a black suit, white shirt, no tie, somehow more severe for the simplicity. He held out his arm with the practiced formality of a man who attended these events constantly, and she took it with the practiced composure of a woman who refused to let anything rattle her. They walked in and the room turned. Not subtly, the way a room turns when something enters it that demands attention. Min-ho noted the stares with satisfaction. Amara noted them with discomfort she buried immediately. She kept her chin up and her hand steady on his arm and reminded herself, 90 days. 90 days and Lily would have a school, and she would have laboratory access and a real address on a real piece of paper. Then Deputy Commissioner Shin Hyun-woo appeared with his wife and a smile like a blade. "Prosecutor Kang," he said, extending his hand, "and this must be your new wife." "Amara," Min-ho said, "my wife." Shin's smile did not waver. "Enchanting. You must tell me, where did you two meet?" "In the rain," Min-ho said, and the simplicity of it was somehow devastating. Amara glanced at him. Something moved across his face that the public version of Kang Min-ho would never have permitted. Something warm and complicated and real. She looked away before she could feel it too deeply. The trouble began in the second week. It arrived in the form of a man named Daniel Kwon, a Korean-American architect who was consulting on a project at SNU and who encountered Amara in the university cafeteria while she was eating lunch over a stack of research notes. He sat across from her uninvited. He was handsome and easy, and he laughed frequently and without effort, and within 20 minutes had made Amara laugh too. Genuinely, the unguarded kind of laugh she hadn't produced in months. Min-ho's driver, who was waiting for Amara, and happened to be watching through the cafeteria window for reasons that were officially professional, reported this to Min-ho. Min-ho appeared at the laboratory at 4 o'clock. He told himself it was a routine visit. He was not a man who acted on irrational impulses. He had a file to drop off. He was in the neighborhood. He was not in the neighborhood. He found Amara at her workstation, Daniel Kwon perched on the edge of a neighboring bench, talking animatedly about some building project, his hand gesturing very close to her arm. Min-ho crossed the room in 8 steps. "I wasn't expecting you," Amara said, looking up. Then she read his face and her eyes narrowed slightly. "I had a file," Min-ho said. He placed it on her bench. Then he turned to Daniel Kwon with the specific brand of pleasant expression that had made confessed criminals in his courtroom suddenly feel the need to confess more. "You are." Daniel Kwon smiled, unintimidated, which immediately made Min-ho dislike him further. "Daniel Kwon, Amara and I just met. She's incredible, by the way. You know her." "She is my wife," Min-ho said. The word wife arrived in the room with significantly more weight than the situation technically required. Daniel Kwon blinked. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know. I was just—" "It was wonderful to meet you," Min-ho said, which ended the conversation as efficiently as a gavel. Daniel Kwon gathered his things and left with admirable speed. Amara waited until he was gone. Then she turned to Min-ho with her arms crossed and her expression flat. "That was unnecessary," she said. "He had his hand near your arm." "Near, not on near." Min-ho said nothing. He picked up her coat from the hook nearby and held it out, a gesture simultaneously generous and controlling, and Amara stared at it for a long moment before taking it, because the laboratory was cold and she'd been meaning to reach for it anyway. "You cannot do that," she said quietly, sliding it on. "I'm not actually your wife." Something crossed Min-ho's face so quickly she almost missed it. Not anger, something rower. "In every legal and public sense," he said carefully, "you are." "Min-ho." He turned toward the door. "The car is outside." She followed him, and in the car they rode in silence, and she watched the city slide past the window and told herself the warmth in her chest was just the coat. Children, in Amara's experience, were the most accurate readers of people. Lily had initially regarded Min-ho with the focused suspicion of a child who had learned early that strange adults could mean disruption. She'd watched him from around doorframes. She'd refused to speak to him directly for 4 days. On the 5th day, he appeared in the garden at 7 in the morning, where Lily had taken to sitting with her drawing materials because the light was good. He sat down on the stone bench 3 feet away and opened a brief and read it. He did not speak to her or look at her. Lily watched him for 40 minutes. Then she put a drawing on the bench beside him and retreated. It was a drawing of a man in a black suit standing in the rain. Min-ho looked at it for a long time. Then he folded it with great care and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest. Amara watched this from the kitchen window over her morning tea and felt something she had absolutely no interest in feeling. 3 weeks into the arrangement, the world outside arrived with its teeth. A tabloid published a photograph, grainy, taken from distance, of Amara and Lily leaving the SNU campus. The headline read, "Prosecutor Kang's mystery wife. Who is SHE and where did she come from?" It was salacious and unkind. The comment sections were worse. Amara found it on her phone at 6 in the morning and sat with it for 20 minutes before Min-ho walked in, read her expression, and took the phone from her hand. His face went very still. "Ignore it," he said. "Easy for you to say. The editor of that outlet owes me 3 favors from a case I buried for him in 2019. Min-ho set the phone face down on the counter. "It will be retracted by afternoon." She stared at him. "You can just do that." "I can suggest it strongly." His jaw tightened. "More importantly, are you all right?" The question landed unexpectedly. Min-ho was not usually a man who led with that particular inquiry, and something about the directness of it, the way he watched her face when he asked it, made her throat tighten. "I'm fine," she said. "Amara." "I said I'm fine." She stood, moved to refill her tea, put her back to him. "I've dealt with worse." A pause, then his voice quieter. "You shouldn't have to." She didn't answer. She stared at the kettle until the steam blurred her vision slightly. The retraction ran by 2 in the afternoon. He found her in the garden, after Lily had gone to sleep. She was sitting on the stone bench, wrapped in a blanket, her notes abandoned beside her, her face turned up toward a sky that wasn't offering many stars. The night was cold and clear and very quiet. Min-ho sat beside her without announcement. They stayed that way for a while, not speaking, the silence between them shifting slowly from tense to something else, something that required neither of them to perform anything. "Tell me about Johns Hopkins," he said eventually. She glanced at him, surprised by the choice of subject. "What about it? What were you studying? What you wanted to do with it?" A pause, then she talked, slowly at first, then with the unstoppable energy of someone who'd been storing this part of themselves in a locked room. Genetic research, hereditary diseases, a particular interest in blood typing anomalies that had developed from something personal, something she didn't elaborate on yet. A dream of working for a WHO-affiliated research program, disrupted by circumstances she was still angry about. He listened, Not the polite, waiting for his turn listening that she'd experienced in many conversations with powerful men. Actually listened, tracking the details, asking precise follow-up questions that proved he'd absorbed everything. At some point she realized she had turned toward him on the bench and he had turned toward her, and the distance between them was considerably less than it had been, and she had absolutely no memory of it closing. She stopped mid-sentence. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," she said, and looked back at the sky and did not move away, and neither did he. The dinner was Min-ho's mother's idea. Madam Kang Jae-suk was 71, immaculate, and possessed of the particular skill, common in certain Korean mothers of a certain generation, of being perfectly polite while performing a complete dissection. She arrived at the house on a Saturday evening with Min-ho's younger sister Soo-yeon, who was warm and curious, and the opposite of her mother in every useful way. Amara dressed carefully. She held Lily's hand and kept her expression open and pleasant. Madam Kang sat across the table and smiled beautifully and asked, within the first 15 minutes, how Amara and Min-ho had met, what her family background was, what her plans were for, and here the pause was so precise it was almost surgical, the future. Amara answered each question calmly and completely, and looked the older woman directly in the eye throughout, which seemed to unsettle Madam Kang in a way she worked hard to conceal. Min-ho, beside Amara, was very still. Then Madam Kang looked at Lily and said, in Korean, perhaps forgetting or perhaps not bothering to remember, that Amara had studied in Seoul for over a year. And whose child is this, exactly? Amara understood every word. Before she could speak, Min-ho said, quietly and absolutely finally, "She is our child. If you have further questions about my family, Iyama, you may direct them to me privately." The table went silent. Soo-yeon coughed and asked Lily if she liked strawberry cake. Lily, who had magnificent social instincts for a 4-year-old, said yes very loudly. The dinner continued. When Madam Kang and Soo-yeon left 2 hours later, Min-ho walked them to the car, and Amara stood at the window and watched him exchange words with his mother. Saw the moment his mother's rigid posture shifted, marginally, saw him say something that made her look back at the house with an expression Amara couldn't fully read. When he came back inside, he stopped in the doorway of the sitting room where she was waiting. "I apologize for her," he said. "She's protective of you, I understand it. She was rude. A little." He crossed the room and sat down, and for a moment he simply looked tired, a version of him she had not seen before, the prosecution office armor quietly removed, just a man sitting in his own home after a difficult evening. "You didn't break," he said. He wasn't smiling, but something in his voice approximated warmth. "I never break at dinner tables," Amara said. "It's a rule." This time he did almost smile. It was a devastating near-miss of a thing, and Amara catalogued it with alarm and put it somewhere she intended to revisit less. It was the research that found it. Not a dramatic revelation, not a stranger arriving at the door with an envelope. It was Amara herself, 3 weeks into her laboratory access at SNU, running a routine blood-typing cross-reference for a hereditary disease study, who noticed the anomaly. The sample shouldn't have matched anything in the system. She ran it again. Then a 3rd time. The number on the screen didn't change. Amara sat very still in her laboratory at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning, the Seoul autumn pressing gray against the windows, and stared at a genetic marker sequence that made no sense, except that it made one very specific, very impossible kind of sense. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. She called the one person she trusted in this building, Dr. Park Yeon-jae, the senior geneticist who had supervised her onboarding and who had the specific, valuable quality of being unshockable. Dr. Park came, looked at the screen, looked at Amara and said, "You need a second sample to confirm." "I know," Amara said. "And you need to be very sure before you do anything with this." "I know," Amara said again. Her voice was completely steady. Her hands, beneath the laboratory bench where Dr. Park couldn't see them, were shaking. She needed Min-ho's DNA. She could not ask him for it directly. Not yet. Not without confirmation. Not without understanding what she was even confirming. The implications of what the screen was suggesting were so enormous that she kept approaching them in her mind, and then retreating, the way you retreat from a ledge when the drop is too far to comprehend. She told herself it could be a database error, a contamination, a coincidence of markers that sometimes appeared across unrelated populations. She told herself this until she got home and found Min-ho in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, teaching Lily to fold dumplings with the patient concentration of a man who took all tasks equally seriously, and looked up when Amara entered with an expression of such uncomplicated warmth that something inside her chest lurched. "You're early," he said. "I finished what I needed to finish," she said. The lie was technically true. She watched him. He had a small smear of flour on his jaw. Lily was pressing a dumpling with her entire fist, producing something architecturally unsound, and Min-ho was examining it with great seriousness and telling her it was structurally creative. Amara sat down at the kitchen island and watched them and thought, "I need his DNA, and I cannot tell him why, and the reason I cannot tell him why is because the answer might be something neither of us can survive knowing." She got the sample from a coffee cup. She hated herself for it. She ran the confirmation test at 7 the next morning before anyone else arrived. The result was the same. The full genetic report landed in her hands on a Thursday. Amara read it 4 times. Then she sat in the empty laboratory, the Seoul skyline gray and indifferent through the window, and allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to fall completely apart, hands over her face, shoulders shaking, silent. Then she stopped, cleaned her face, straightened her lab coat, and thought about what she knew. What she knew, that 14 months ago, when she had arrived in Seoul chasing a research position, she had been 38 weeks pregnant. That Lily had been born in a Seoul hospital. That Lily's father, a man Amara had loved briefly and lost entirely, had been a Korean-American physician she had met during her Johns Hopkins postgraduate year. That he had died in a car accident 3 weeks before Lily was born. That she had never properly investigated his Korean family connections, because grief and a newborn and financial collapse did not leave room for genealogical research. What the DNA now said, that Lily's paternal genetic line connected, with 99.97% probability, to the sample from Min-ho's coffee cup. Kang Min-ho was not Lily's father. The match was 1 generation above. Kang Min-ho was Lily's grandfather. She told him at the kitchen table, with the report in her hands and Lily at school and Mrs. Young discreetly absent. She placed the document in front of him. She watched his face as he read it, watched the prosecutor's trained composure hold, and then develop very slowly a fracture line. "My son," he said very quietly. "Yes," Amara said. Min-ho's son, Kang Jae-woo, 26 years old, Korean-American, raised partly in the United States during Min-ho's marriage to his American-educated ex-wife, a medical student at Johns Hopkins, killed in a car accident 14 months ago. Min-ho had not known about a pregnancy. Jae-woo had not told him. Whether Jae-woo had known himself, that Amara could not answer. The silence in the kitchen was the kind that rewrites things. "Lily," Min-ho said. His voice was barely above a breath. "Is your granddaughter," Amara said. "Yes." He looked up from the report. His eyes, those controlled, precise, careful eyes, were doing something she had never seen them do. The composure was still there, technically, in the set of his jaw and the straightness of his spine. But behind it, something vast and unguarded was pressing forward. "She has his nose," Min-ho said suddenly. "I thought I noticed, but I told myself." He stopped. Amara watched him realize, in real time, all the small things he had noticed about Lily and quietly dismissed. The particular way she laughed. The shape of her hands, the single-lidded eyes that echoed his own across generations. He had been falling in love with his granddaughter for weeks without knowing why the pull was so immediate, so bone-deep. "Min-ho," Amara said softly. He stood up, walked to the window, stood with his back to her, both hands flat on the windowsill, looking at the Buckhanson Mountain in the middle distance. His shoulders rose and fell once deeply. Amara said nothing. She understood that some griefs require a witness, not a response. After a very long time, he said, "Does she know?" "She's 4, Amara said gently. "She knows you fold dumplings badly and let her win at every game you play with her." Something broke open in him then. She heard it in the single breath he released, ragged and honest and enormous. She crossed the kitchen and stood beside him at the window, not touching, just present, the way he had been present for her in the garden on that cold night 3 weeks ago. After a moment, his hand found hers on the windowsill. They stood like that for a long time, looking at the mountain. The crisis arrived 6 days later, as crises tend to do, from a direction no one was watching. Deputy Commissioner Shin Hyun-woo, whose corruption case Min-ho had been building for 2 years, had apparently decided that the best defense was a devastating offense. He had hired people, the specific kind of people that powerful cornered men with criminal connections hire, to locate a vulnerability in Kang Min-ho's personal life. They found Amara. The first warning was a car that sat too long outside the school where Lily attended. Di-sung noticed it. Min-ho was informed at 2 in the afternoon. By 3, he had arranged additional security on Lily without telling Amara why, because he was trying to confirm the threat before alarming her. He did not confirm it fast enough. At 5:15, Amara left SNU for the parking garage. 2 men in suits appeared from between parked cars. They were professional and quiet, and they told her, in accented English, that Deputy Commissioner Shin wished to have a conversation, and that cooperation would be better for everyone, especially the child. Amara's response was to break one man's grip, using a technique she had learned from a self-defense workshop in Baltimore, scream loudly enough to activate 3 car alarms, and run. She ran 4 steps before Min-ho came through the parking garage entrance at a dead sprint. She had never seen him move like that. The public Kang Min-ho moved with deliberate precision. This version covered the length of a parking garage in seconds, his suit jacket flying open, his face stripped of every careful layer down to something primal and blazing. His bodyguards handled the 2 men with cold efficiency. Min-ho reached Amara and stopped 2 feet from her, scanned her from head to foot with eyes that were conducting a rapid damage assessment, and then pulled her into his chest with both arms before either of them could think about it. She gripped the back of his jacket. She did not cry. She pressed her face against his shoulder and breathed and felt his arms lock around her like architecture, like something designed specifically to be the answer to exactly this. His heart was hammering. She could feel it through his shirt. "I'm all right," she said, muffled. "I know," he said, in a voice that communicated he did not entirely know this yet. "I know you are." He held on longer than was necessary. She did not pull back. Lily was at Mrs. Young's sister's home, safe, oblivious, reportedly winning at every card game available. The mansion was quiet. Min-ho made calls for 2 hours, voice low, words clipped, the prosecutor burning every resource and connection he possessed to ensure Shin Hyun-woo understood the dimensions of what he had just done. Amara sat in the study and listened to the voice in the other room and thought about what it meant that the sound of him dismantling someone's world on her behalf made her feel something other than fear. When he came in, he looked older, not in the way that weakness ages people, in the way that carrying enormous things ages people. "Shin will not move against you again," he said. "Is that?" "A certainty, yes." She studied him. "What did it cost you?" A pause. "Nothing I wasn't willing to spend." She stood, crossed to where he stood in the doorway and stopped before him, close enough that the firelight from behind her reached his face and softened it. "Min-ho," she said, "the 90 days." His expression changed. "They're almost up," she said. She was watching his face with the same precision he usually aimed at other people. "We had an arrangement. The arrangement had a timeline. I need to know," her voice steadied deliberately. "I need to know what we are doing." He was very still. What we are, he said slowly, is not something I am able to reduce to an arrangement anymore. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It isn't. He raised one hand, slow, deliberate, giving her every opportunity to step back, and framed her face with a care that was more devastating than any grand gesture could have been. What I want to tell you is that I have not slept properly since the night I found you in the rain. That lily drew a picture of me in the rain, and I have carried it against my chest every day since, and I did not examine why until recently. That when those men had their hands near you today, I understood something about myself that I cannot unknow. Amara's breath had gone uneven. What did you understand? She asked. That I would burn every system I have ever built, he said quietly, to keep you and Lily safe, not because of an arrangement, not to win anything. His thumb moved slightly against her cheekbone. Because you are, somehow, impossibly, the most important thing that has ever walked into my life. Both of you. The fire crackled softly. She looked at him for a long time. Then, I'm terrified of this. So am I, he said immediately. No hesitation, no armor. I have been afraid of very few things in my life. This is one of them. She exhaled, leaned her forehead against his. His other arm came around her waist, slow and asking permission in every inch of its movement, and she answered by staying. They stood like that in the doorway of the study, foreheads together, the firelight warm around them, neither speaking, because everything that needed to be said had been said, and what came next was something that belonged to the private dark of a house that had slowly, without anyone authorizing it, become a home. The fire burned lower, the night deepened. The door was not closed in anger this time. It was closed very gently, from the inside. She was gone before dawn. Not entirely gone, she'd left a note. 3 lines, neat handwriting. I need time to think. Don't worry about Lily, she's with Mrs. Young, I'm sorry. Min-ho stood in the kitchen holding the note at 5:40 in the morning, dressed in yesterday's shirt, and felt the specific quality of silence that fills a house when someone important is no longer in it. He understood it. He had lain awake for 2 hours and traced every fear she carried. That she was a temporary arrangement transformed by circumstance, that the DNA revelation complicated everything, that a woman who had survived what she'd survived had very good reasons to distrust moments of warmth before they became weapons. That she was afraid he would wake up in daylight, recalculate, and find that she and Lily were a complication rather than a choice. He understood all of it. He put on his coat. Di-sung found him the car in 4 minutes. He checked 3 places, based on 3 things he had learned about her in 8 weeks of paying very close attention. The Han River Park first, because she'd mentioned once, quietly, that moving water helped her think, and that there was a particular bench near the Mapo Bridge where the light came across the water in the early morning in a way that reminded her of the Lagos waterfront where she'd grown up. He found her there. She was sitting with her knees drawn up inside her coat, Lily asleep across her lap with the complete muscular abandonment of a child who trusts their foundation absolutely. The morning light was coming gold across the Han River exactly as she had described. She was not crying. She was looking at the water with the expression of a woman conducting a very serious internal argument. She heard his footsteps, her shoulders tightened, then released. He sat beside her on the bench, close, not touching. For a while neither spoke. The river moved, the light changed. I was coming back, she said finally, not defensively, as though she needed him to know it. I know, he said. I just needed to. I know, Amara. She looked at him. He was looking at the river, his profile clean and sharp in the morning light. His expression carrying none of the prosecution office severity, just a kind of open, patient steadiness that she was beginning to understand was his truest face. The DNA changes everything, she said. The DNA changes nothing, he said, about what I feel. How can you say that? Lily is your granddaughter. I was your son's. You were a woman my son loved, he said, who gave him a daughter he never got to meet, and who survived something enormous alone, and who is sitting on a park bench in Seoul with that daughter asleep on her lap, and who looked at me on a street in the rain and refused to flinch. He finally turned to look at her directly. The DNA told me I have a granddaughter I didn't know I had. It told me nothing about you and me that changes what is true. Amara stared at him. What is true? She asked softly. He held her gaze, the morning light between them, the river, the sleeping child. That I love you, he said, simply, completely, like a man reading a verdict he has already decided on. That I would like to spend the rest of my life finding ways to be worthy of that look you give me when you think I'm not watching. Her breath left her. What look? The one where you almost smile, the one you keep stopping. She laughed then, sudden, real, unguarded, the kind of laugh that breaks defenses like sunlight breaks ice. Lily stirred on her lap, resettled, slept on. Min-ho watched Amara laugh and felt every tightly held thing in his chest release, quietly, like a fist opening. The formal prosecution case against Shin Hyun-woo concluded 6 weeks later. Min-ho presented it with the methodical devastation that had made his career: 12 counts, 3 years of evidence, 4 cooperating witnesses. Shin was remanded before the evening news cycle. The courtroom gallery watched Kang Min-ho dismantle a powerful man with the same focused calm he brought to folding dumplings, and several reporters commented afterward that the prosecutor had seemed somehow different, less armored perhaps, more certain. The kind of certainty, one journalist wrote, that comes not from having nothing to lose but from knowing precisely what you have to keep. That evening, he came home to a kitchen that smelled of jollof rice. Amara had been teaching Mrs. Young, who had approached the lesson with the seriousness of a doctoral student, and Lily announcing, from across the room, that she had lost 2 teeth and been promised ice cream by someone who was definitely Min-ho and absolutely should be held to this promise. Min-ho looked at the room, the warmth of it, the noise of it. He had lived in this house for 7 years. It had never sounded like this before. He crossed to Amara at the stove and said against her ear, I won. She turned, and the expression on her face, proud, warm, carefully trying not to show how proud and warm, was better than any verdict. I know, she said. It was on the news. I mean other things as well, he said. She held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to the stove because the rice was at a critical moment, and also because the way he was looking at her required some recovery time. He asked her on a Sunday morning in the garden. Not on one knee, though he would have. He told her later if she'd required it. Instead, he brought her coffee in the garden where she was reading, sat beside her, and placed a ring on the bench between them. Simple, platinum with a single round diamond, elegant without being a statement. The 90 days ended 6 weeks ago, he said. I'm aware, she said, looking at the ring. You're still here. The jiggy is very good, she said. Her voice was giving her away. Amara. She looked up. I want to do this correctly, he said. Not an arrangement, not a legal instrument, a marriage. A pause. If you are willing. She looked at him for a long time, looked at the ring, looked at Lily, who was in the garden with her drawing materials and was, with absolutely transparent subtlety, pretending not to watch. Lily, Amara called. Lily's head popped up with the speed of someone who had definitely been watching. What do you think? Amara asked. Lily considered Min-ho with the gravity of a 4-year-old who understood that this was an important question. Then she said, He lets me win at cards. Say yes. Amara laughed, and her eyes were bright, and she looked back at Min-ho, whose composure had developed the particular warm fracture it only developed for the two of them. Yes, she said. It was small and private, and entirely real. A chapel in Seoul with candlelight and white roses, and a kente cloth sash across Amara's ivory gown that she had brought from the one good thing she'd packed before everything fell apart 14 months ago. A piece of fabric her mother had given her, gold and green and red, the colors of the Ashanti, a piece of home she'd carried through every hard thing. Min-ho saw it and asked about it in the car on the way and listened to the whole story with his full attention, and when they reached the chapel he held her hand and said, She'll know all of it, everything you came from. Lily walked before them in a white dress, dropping rose petals with total commitment and zero adherence to any particular path. Min-ho's sister, Soo-yeon, cried from the second row. Madam Kang Jae-suk sat in the front row in immaculate silver and said nothing, but at the reception, she found Amara alone for a moment and said, in careful English, "My son has been alone for a very long time. You have given him back his face." She paused. "And you have given me a granddaughter I did not know I had." Amara held the old woman's gaze. "She's extraordinary," she said. "Yes," Madam Kang said, with the absolute conviction of a grandmother who has decided this on her own terms. "She is." 3 months later. Seoul in February, the city wrapped in clean, cold air, the Bukhansan mountain visible from every high window with new snow on its peak. Amara stood in the bathroom in the early morning light, looking at a small plastic test on the counter, and felt the specific quality of a world rearranging itself around a new center of gravity. She heard Min-ho in the kitchen, the particular sound of him making coffee, a ritual she had learned completely. The order of the steps, the way he set 2 cups before he confirmed she was awake because by now he simply knew. She heard him pause, the way he always paused when he heard her moving in the morning, listening to confirm she was all right. She walked to the kitchen doorway. He turned from the counter. Read her face with the precision that had always, from the very first night, been his most extraordinary quality. His eyes dropped to the test in her hand. Back to her face. Something moved through him that she watched like whether, surprise, comprehension, and then something so enormous and unguarded that the kitchen, with its morning light and its 2 coffee cups and its smell of sesame oil, became briefly sacred. He crossed to her in 3 steps. He took her face in both hands and looked at her for a long moment, and then he pressed his forehead to hers, and she felt him breathe, one long exhale, the kind that releases everything. "Are you?" he began. "Yes," she said. She had tears on her face, she realized. She hadn't noticed them arriving. "I'm very all right." His arms came around her. From down the hallway, the sound of small feet. Lily appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, hair a spectacular early morning halo, trailing her favorite blanket. She looked at her mother, and Min-ho holding each other in the kitchen light. "Is it a hug morning?" she asked. "Yes," Min-ho said, without moving his face from Amara's hair. "It is a hug morning." Lily crossed the kitchen at a dead run and inserted herself between them with complete authority, and Min-ho's arms simply expanded to include her. As they always did, as they had done from nearly the first week, with the natural ease of a man who had not known this shape was missing from his life until it arrived. Amara pressed her face into his shoulder and held her daughter and felt the particular quality of a morning that is not the end of something hard, but the beginning of something true. The research paper bore 3 names. Kang Amara Jae-woo. She had taken the hyphenation on her own terms, for her own reasons, keeping Osai in her professional work and adding the Korean in the way of a woman who has built 2 worlds and found them capable of holding each other. The paper was on hereditary blood typing anomalies in mixed heritage populations, and it was accepted by the Journal of Genetic Medicine on the same Tuesday that Lily started 1st grade, wearing a uniform she had decided was a costume and therefore excellent. Min-ho attended the school's first-day parent gathering in a charcoal suit that Lily immediately decorated with a sticker of a yellow duck, which he wore for the rest of the day. 3 people in his office saw it and said nothing. That evening, the 4 of them sat in the Bukhansan garden, a garden that had grown more alive over the year, as though it had responded to the new noise in the house. Min-ho's mother had sent a particular plant from her own garden, which Amara suspected was a peace offering and had accepted as such, giving it the best light. Amara was reading. Min-ho was watching Lily negotiate with a caterpillar. Their daughter, 6 weeks old, named Jaeyeon Amara Kang, currently sleeping in a carrier against Min-ho's chest with the profound satisfaction of someone whose entire world was approximately 2 feet in diameter, stirred occasionally, and Min-ho's hand went to her back each time with automatic precision. He caught Amara watching him. held her gaze across the garden. The particular almost smile crossed her face, the one he had named, the one she'd stopped stopping. He didn't smile back. He just looked at her with the expression that the public Kang Min-ho, feared prosecutor and iron-jawed authority, was not supposed to possess, open and warm and entirely, helplessly certain. It had begun in the rain on a Seoul pavement. A man who stopped when he was not supposed to stop. A woman who looked up when she was not supposed to be unafraid. And whatever it was that woke in him in that moment, older than logic, deeper than arrangement, stronger than every wall that surviving had required them both to build. It had turned out to be the most accurate thing either of them had ever found.